social media, which is making us all media producers. And that has no control whatsoever. Anything and everything can be there. And the platforms are beginning to see their responsibility, but that's still a way ahead. And I think also in this concept, the concept of peace has changed. We are very much thinking of the concept of hybrid war or hybrid threat or hybrid influencing, but actually very often we are also saying that we are in some kind of a war and struggle with each other or against something or defending ourselves against something. And that's very strange because, on the other hand, I think that European basic values, which are democracy, free media, human rights, rule of law, and free market economy, those are the foundations that are very strong in every respect. So that actually it's a bit strange to think that we should be on the defense when actually all those values that we have to believe that the European values and the European societal values, not only political but also societal values, education, social healthcare system, etc., are the best in the world. We know that. And particularly in this part of Europe, in the Nordic countries or in the vicinity of the Nordic countries, we are so strong that it's weird that we should think that we are somehow threatened by something. The only thing that we probably would be threatened and are threatened is the generation gap, which, however, is not the same in the northern part of Europe as it is in south. I was in Italy last week, and that's where I was thinking very much that the family values and the kind of the tightness of the family and the societal action and the speed around us is very different in north and in south. Also, digitalization, these new technologies have a different meaning in the north, thus also making us cyber aware better than many of those countries that are less digitalized. However, that shouldn't matter really, because also the threats are tailor-made, but also our resilience should be tailor-made. But if democracy is in danger, if elections don't bring change, if election is just re-electing the old regime because they are controlling the free media, that's where you have the danger. And that's not a hybrid thing as such, because for hybrid we think that the adversary comes from outside. So we have internally dividing lines that are being the greatest risk. Thus the unity, which was discussed earlier, is so important.
So it's not about crusade, but actually about defense, being on the defenses.
Or being assertive of your own strengths rather than discussing the agenda that somebody else is giving you. That set your own agenda and be strong in that. That's what my Europe looks like.
You made a perfect introduction to Father Philip, who has come from the west to east and from south to the north. What about your definition of soul of Europe?
Well, first of all, perhaps I would speak in English, because otherwise it's a little bit not easy to speak in Estonian if the others are speaking in English. So, first of all, I think that to define a soul is extremely difficult. The soul is something that you really cannot define, because it's your own identity. And but I just was thinking that I read actually recently again the words of Pope Francis when he was here in Estonia, and in a certain way he tried to define Estonia. It was in the meeting in the Rose Garden of the Estonian presidency, when he kind of defined Estonia as a land with memory of its past, of what it has lived, and a land of a fruitful land, viljakas maa. Both of them, and it was really very interesting, because the Pope tried to overcome like a dilemma, which is, I think, very present in the actual society, a dilemma between the roots of the people and the progress of the society, to show that you cannot have progress without finding your own roots, and on the other side, roots are not the memory of the roots. It's not something which is putting an obstacle to the progress of the society, or the progress of the Estonian society, for instance. And so when we try to apply that to Europe, I read also another idea that in another place Pope Francis explained, to say, what did Christianity bring to Europe as such? I don't mean what Christianity brought to the humankind, the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ and so on, but what did it bring to the European society? And he says something which is interesting, I think. He said that there was in the history of Europe a moment which was a moment of great changing of perspective. And it was the moment when the Regula of St. Benedictus was written in the 6th century. And so after that, as you know, all in a great part, the development of the European culture, of the urban, of the cities and so on, was very much related also with the development of the Benedictine monasteries all over Europe. And he said, what was the new thing, the novelty of the Regula of St. Benedictus with respect to the old civilization? The old civilization, also old Rome and so on, was based on the structure of the society according to the roles, to the functions of the elements. So there was the civis, the citizen, who was the one who had the rights and the privileges. There was a miles, the soldier, who was meant to defend and to strengthen the power of the king of everyone. And the third was the servus, the slave, which was only like a property. And so the novelty was that Saint Benedict spoke about not anymore about a society in terms of people with different functions, which was also the model of the Indo-European culture, as Dumézil has shown, but it brought a society which was, I would say, based on the person, persoonipõhine, avec celle-là, not anymore on the function of the person, to be a slave, to be a soldier, to be something else, not what the person is doing, but what the person is as such by itself. And it was the first time, we can say, in the world, in the story of the world, that was built a society which was based on the recognition of the person as such, not only of what different persons can give to the society. So in that sense, it gave a completely new sense of society which center is the person. If you forget that, so you have I don't know communism, Nazism, many other things, and it's a regression. Also, when you see the person not according to what it is, but to what it is doing for the society. And so I would say that for me, the soul of Europe as a society, it's like that, to say a society, perhaps the first one in the history of humankind, which was able to put at the beginning the absolute of the human person, of the human life. It doesn't mean that Europeans didn't kill anybody. Of course, they killed many people even sometimes in the name of the faith. We all know that. But as such, let's say the value of the person is not what it is doing in the society, but what it is by itself. And so I think that what was at the beginning the specificity, I would say, of the European culture could be still for us now what we need to discover again, to say, the centrality of the person, and the fact also that every person, so the newly born or not even born in the body of his mother, or the old person, or the migrants, to understand that above all, and it explains also what are the positions of Pope Francis, I think now, above all, each one of them is a person, and as a person, it is a richness, independently of what concretely this person is able to do or not to do for the rest of the society.
Okay, it's very good that you brought in the more spiritual side of it, and also I think it's even better that now we have Pablo, who's from the country that's, sometimes when we say Europe, although your country is clearly a European country, we don't mean your country because we mean only European Union or Western Europe or countries from west from certain fault line. On the other hand, also your country is Christian, but sometimes when we talk about Christian civilization, we talk more about the Western Christianity and its impacts, be it in the form of Catholicism or Lutheranism as it is in Finland or to an extent in Estonia still. So I'm glad that Pablo could also explain how he sees the soul of Europe and how he would define it.
Thank you very much. I'll do this presentation, if you allow.
Yes. So you'll visualize it a bit, how you see it.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be in Estonia and to be in the European Union. Yes, I am from Ukraine. I am Ukrainian, but I feel myself also European, and I will explain you why. I have a lot of examples for you. We have limited time, but I will try my best. A first slide. Perhaps you see here something well known in Europe. You see a picture of destroyed Ypres. It's a city in Belgium which was completely destroyed during the First World War. This city, you know, it's recalling me what is Europe, what is Soul Europe, and how Soul Europe actually began to exist, because it was created after several awful and disastrous wars. We see Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel there, just commemorating 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War. I hope you know a lot about this event, but I want to focus on the picture downstairs. I have studied at the College of Europe in Belgium, in Bruges, and every year when we start an academic year at the college, our rector brings us to that Ypres and to trenches, to the museum of the First World War. So we sit down or stand in the trenches, and the guide is telling us what was the history of Europe and where are we now. We are living in a peaceful Europe. It's a peaceful project. I mean, for many young people, my generation and perhaps your generation as well, all generations, it's not possible to study at the College of Europe, of course. Not everyone can be there. Others study at other universities. But I completely support the idea of Manfred Weber when I have read that he is promoting the idea of giving a free ticket to people who reached 18 years old, because it's very important to travel across Europe and to see the identities of other countries, of other member states, because you understand better your own identity. When I studied at the College of Europe, I managed to travel to more than 15 countries in the EU during some holiday breaks or during weekend, and it helped me to discover what is Europe, how it's different, how it's beautiful, and what should I learn from it. About values, we have talked a lot today about values, what they mean for European citizens, for everyday life. I really encourage you, if someone does not know yet about the website, it is called What Europe Does for Me. And it's a very interesting project recently launched by the European Parliament, where you can really go and read what your town or city or your community or your religion or whatever else is involved, and how it is financed, what is organized, how it gets better thanks to the European Union. I have been recently to Warsaw, for example. I was really impressed how Warsaw has been changed during recent 15 years when I was last time there. It's a completely modern and very comfortable city with a great infrastructure, and many people told me it's thanks to the European Union that they help us, and we enjoy it right now. About the values, it's of course about multilateralism, which is also part of core values of European Union in the world. It's following international law, and we value international law, I think, only in that case when we lack of international law, unfortunately, because we think it's something written on a paper, it does not relate to us. But I'm from the country, from Ukraine, which witnessed a serious breach of the international law. It's annexation of Crimea, it's a conflict in Donbass. And I really value the international law and meaning of peace and meaning of multilateralism, because it's about multilateral cooperation, not unilateral actions, which were done, for example, by our neighbor. And we see what are results of unilateralism. I want also to say something about promoting the soul of Europe, because we criticize Europe a lot, and it's good when we think about the EU and Europe, when we talk about it, it means it is alive. It means we should improve it, and we can improve it, but it does not mean that we do not care about it. I want to stress that Europe has achieved a lot of great results, and first picture, it's about a Nobel Peace Prize, which the EU received in 2012. It's not only because the EU is a peaceful project, but it's also written the EU managed to transform some countries to democracies, like Greece, Spain, Portugal. It's also transforming countries which I hope will become member states in future, like the Balkan states. It's a peace building. It's tackling such a huge issue for all the humanity, which is climate change. It is also a nuclear deal agreement with Iran, which we know now is under huge challenge, actually, but I'm very glad that EU follows its commitments, and I hope this agreement will stay in power. It's also about Africa. Jean-Claude Juncker recently stressed that Africa is becoming more and more important, and we can say openly the EU now is losing I would say, the game over Africa, or cooperation over Africa, is losing to China, is losing to India, to other countries. It's losing because of challenges like climate change as well. But Europe should do better, it's for sure. I want also to stress on challenges, on disinformation. Our speaker told us very, very well. It's also on crisis. We know about euro crisis, financial crisis, migration crisis. It's also about unilateralism, which I have told you before. It's some behavior from our close allies, but also from our lovely neighbors from East, for example, Eastern Europe. And we see some example of their soldiers, Russian soldiers, which are crossing the line of Crimea and the Donbass, so aggression against Ukraine. About disinformation, it's also not a challenge only to Ukraine, but it's a challenge to the EU. Just
finish the sentence.
Okay, it's a huge challenge, because I heard in the European Parliament, for example, from El País journalist, Russian propaganda portrays Catalonia as a conflict where Madrid has sent tanks to finish this conflict, and it's total lie, but it is in in our life. And last point, it's about Ukraine. 2 days ago, we commemorated 5th anniversary of the Ukrainian Euromaidan revolution. It's a very huge topic. I hope you know very well about it. It's a tragedy, but it's also start of changes in Ukraine. Why I mean it's relevant here for Europe? Because we learn a lot now from Europe how to reform Ukraine. We learn from Baltic states, from Visegrad 4 on successes, but also challenges. But we also want to inspire the European Union because we are now committed to European Union values. We are committed to agreements, to multilateral negotiations, and that's what we want to share. And it's a pleasure of me to be here with you. Thank you very much.
Okay, maybe the last presentation actually brought out the biggest contrast that we have experienced 2 world wars in 20th century, which both of them, especially the second one, actually taught us a good lesson about peace, about the need for cooperation, although some countries like ours here stayed stuck behind the Iron Curtain. Still, eventually, we also started profiting from it. We are richer than ever before, but all of our countries are richer. People are richer, better off. They have better access to resources like education or travel. We can afford to travel, even, I don't know, even in Ukraine or Russia, which decided to attack Ukraine. People get to afford more of everything. And we have those lessons behind us. How come are we facing again quite threatening tendencies? Why are the comparisons with 1930s flying again?
Well, if I may start, first of all, I think that this comes also to this generation gap, because the interpretation of history and the concept of history is very different. Because the people or the generation that didn't know anything about fascism or communism, they speak very lightly of that. And they are searching for some kind of a format of glory through being great. You know, America wants to be great again, but also Russia wants to be great again. And the way they can be great is to lean into the elements in their history when they were victorious. And okay, that happened to mean, you know, death of millions of people in famine and in wars and in concentration camps. But yet it was the place where they were victorious. And I think this is something that we also should pay attention to, that what are actually the phenomena that we are discussing. I think, thank you very much for this, bringing this is crisis elements there, but are they actually kind of the, how should I say, that the icing, actually? That if we trust democracy, if we trust freedom of speech, if we trust market economy, if we trust human rights and rule of law, which we do trust, isn't that so that at the end of the day, those are the ones that will remain also in the past? I'd like to, there was President Niinistö's quote in the program. I would just like to quote him again. This was in the meeting for ambassadors in August this year, when he said that, when there was somebody who asked that, what are the European values for you, Mr. President? And he said that ethics comes from Jerusalem, culture, democracy comes from Athens, and order comes from Rome. And I think that those are kind of the 3 elements that we have to build our societies also in the future, plus the revival and reinvention of democracy.
Father Philip, you mentioned Christian values, human values, the value of every personality. Do you perceive them as under attack now more than maybe, I don't know, 20 years ago?
Well, you know, I was very happy to listen to that Pavlo spoke about the town of Ypres in Belgium, because actually 3 weeks ago I was in Ypres with bishops of the countries of the European Union, And I remember very well that we went to an enormous military cemetery in Passchendaele, the name, where 12,000 British soldiers are buried. And then we went, and we were there. We prayed for the souls of those 12,000 soldiers, because many Irish people also, because really when you see that sea of crosses, of white crosses, really you understand a little bit more why we should struggle for peace, because it was really crazy. And then we went also to a very large German cemetery where there are 5,000 people buried and 50,000 names of soldiers, German soldiers, who were never found anymore in Ypres, in the Battle of Ypres. And also we prayed for them, for the souls, even if they died 100 years ago. And really it was very strong to see, first of all, that 100 years ago we were as crazy as we are today, I think, or perhaps more even. And because of the First World War came from the fact that different countries, Germany, France, Austria, and so on, wanted really, each one of them like to build an imperium. Perhaps for that reason the war began, and because also the Europeans themselves wanted not peace but power. They were looking not for peace and the sake of their own citizens, but for the power of their country, because perhaps they love their country, but perhaps not exactly in a good way. And so in the 30s, I think, of course, that there was a Nazi fascism. I'm not sure that it's exactly the same reasons why we are here in the situation where we are. I don't think that the countries, European countries, are following the same objective that they were following in the 30s, in Italy, in Germany, or even in France. But I think that really people should go a little bit more often to those big military cemeteries in Belgium to understand that a lot depends on the choices of individual persons. There is not really, let's say, a determination to war. But if some people had done what they should have done at that time, all those young men, the 20,000 young British men, perhaps would not have died. And I think that now it's the responsibility of the persons who have the political power now to show also the same strength in the good sense. For that reason, I think that heroes are usually those who build Europe, but heroes need saints, saint people, because otherwise they don't find the motivations they need. Heroes without motivations are not heroes anymore, and perhaps what we feel now in Europe is that there are a lot of good feelings, but perhaps a certain lack of profound motivations of knowing exactly what we are looking for, and also among the elite and the persons who have the power. So I'm not so pessimistic as perhaps I would have been in the 30s, but I think there is a lack of soul perhaps in Europe. It's already Pope John Paul II spoke about that. A certain lack of soul, and we need more soul in order to avoid the tragedies we have seen in the past.
Well, it's Pablo is from a country in war, which is clearly not the fault of your country, because it's not your ambition for power, but rather protecting yourself. How do you see is it possible in any kind of human saintly level to decrease the impact of the war, to also, maybe if you look at the other side who's attacking, how do you see it from people to people level?
Okay, yeah, there are a lot of different situations, I would say. Propaganda is influencing the situation and poisoning it a lot. Many families in Ukraine and Russia, unfortunately, do not speak anymore to each other because not their minds are ruling themselves, but their television and channels are saying what to say to their relatives. I would say another point, it's traveling. You mentioned traveling in Europe. I would say very important role plays visa liberalization between Ukraine and the European Union, which was recently finally reached, and I'm very happy with that because I see a lot of people, not only of young generation, but I see like my parents' generation or even much older. Now they go to Europe and they see that it is a very peaceful project, firstly, and they learn what best practices can Ukraine have from it. So it's not anymore blaming just Ukrainian government that, oh, we have social problems, we have that, we have this, not enough reforms. But now people go look at in Europe, come back and try to do something by themselves. So it's kind of a value of self-organization, I would say, but it's also about solidarity if you speak about conflict. Ukrainians are still quite open towards Russian. We now have quite many Russians living in Ukraine, which actually went away from Putin's regime. Some journalists living in Kyiv. We had some MP who unfortunately was killed last year by security forces of Russia, of course. We have many other problems, but I also want to perhaps finish my word about Christian democracy. In Ukraine, it's now a very huge issue about future of the church in Ukraine. We had before, and we still have 3 Christian Orthodox churches. One of them is influenced and controlled by Moscow Patriarchy. Now we are on the way of receiving finally independent church, which will be granted by Constantinople. And it's also about Christian democracy because, yes, Europe has Catholicism, Protestantism, but Europe has also Eastern Orthodox. It's about Bulgaria, it's about Romania, it's about Greece, it's partly about Latvia and Estonia, Finland as well, and it's about Ukrainians. We see ourselves also part of this Christian democracy. I hope in future this religion part will also influence constructively politics and ethics among Ukrainians themselves, and I hope, really hope, among Ukrainians and Russians too.
To the other 2 panelists, what's the ideal state of matters between state and church? How do you see it? What's the perfect position? Because it seems that sometimes politicians try to take advantage of the church, sometimes also some churches try to take certain politicians under their helm. What's the perfect relationship? Because Ukraine has trouble because of political reasons, but who wants to go first?
Well, we have a state church, so I mean that's supposed to be the ideal solution. That we are paying taxes to church, and church is also taking care of the people's registers. I think church, referring again to Niinista's piece, I think that the 10 Commandments are actually one of the core values of the European values. So in that sense, the religion as such and as moral and ethical value is valuable, and it should be cherished and it should be remembered. However, I do also see the difference in thinking that, you know, church, and in particular now when it was the 90% of Lutherans in Finland, but that's also decreasing. So again, I come to this generation gap. So younger people don't see church as an institution important. They don't see religion as such also. They don't see that important because they think that their moral and ethical values do stem from the religion, but they don't see the connection. Because I didn't take my children to church, but my mother took me to church. So this is the difference. But church has a very good impact on people if you go there. It calms you down. You kind of somehow sense the history and you sense the moral and ethical values of your society. And I think in that sense it is important. But it shouldn't be used as a political tool, which is being used. Also in the Western Balkans, the Islam is becoming a political thing. Also in Orthodox Church, there are a lot of political issues. And I'm very happy for the process that is taking place in Ukraine.
Well, well, in a certain way, I agree with you in the sense that Europe also it's a country where, some of countries where since already a certain time, as we said, church and the state are separated. I think that the problem is that the sense of this separation is very different also in different countries. I'm born in a country where the concept of separation between church and state is quite extreme because of the historical heresy of the background of the French Revolution, and so in a certain sense the actual French state was constituted 2 centuries ago in opposition to the church. So in France, it's very special, this separation between the state and church, and the laïcité, as in France we very often speak of, but in the sense more of an opposition than a collaboration. And I think that, of course, in that sense, it's not a very good way of separation, I would say, and for that reason, also, all the time, people are speaking again about this laïcité, if it should be or not. But the sense of separation of church and state, in the sense that both, each one at its level, are working for, let's say, the sake of the persons, of each person's, let's say, the social welfare, and then the spiritual welfare. So I think that if we see things like that, first of all, we find that it's normal that the two are separated. But it's also necessary that the two really collaborate and are open one to the other. And perhaps in Northern Europe, I must say that even if I don't agree with everything which happens in Northern Europe, but I must say that this collaboration, this consensus between church and state is perhaps more effective than more in Southern Europe.
But can we speak, are we entitled to speak of Christian Europe in like 20 years if actually many people don't go to church, they have forgotten, they don't have even the elementary training about the Christian values or how you, I don't know, behave at church, and what does it mean? What does this part of New Testament actually mean? What does it teach? Are we, I don't know, in a generation or so, can we speak of Christian Europe, or is it just something?
If I may just quickly add that I was actually studying, because religion is also a topic at school, and my daughter is finishing high school, let's say this year, and we were doing religious exercises with her just the last week, and she said completely, I don't know why we are doing this nonsense. That, you know, she thought that it was a useless topic, that why should we waste our time on that? But then we went to the roots, and we, for instance, learned that this presidency, Jerusalem, that actually 10 Commandments, they are Jewish, Christian, and Islam base. And that's coming from the same roots, and they actually share a lot, which means that let's talk about maybe religious, yes, but let's talk about moral and ethical Europe, because the foundation of moral and ethics is the same, and that's what she would have wanted to study. But actually, you cannot really make a separation of moral and ethics if you don't put an element of religion into this, and also tolerance, which I think is one of the key values in Europe. Tolerance is something which has very deep roots also in church of the modern thinking. Of course, like you said, a lot of people were killed for that. But anyways, I mean, we should have basis in love and tolerance, and that would be one of the European elements of the European soul.
Do you see those values emerging now and being on the rise?
Well, I think that being either on the rise, I don't know, but personally I think that even if many people in Europe now are a little bit far away from, let's say, the traditional confessional identity, but from one part, that's true also that the roots of each one are part of each one also. So one thing is that you personally are going to church. The other thing that let's say Christian values have configured the person that you are at that moment. Of course, to be a Christian, it means not only to be to have a Christian culture, but those roots are really a part of us, because otherwise nobody is just beginning to exist from nothing, you know. But we come from our parents, we come from the culture we are coming from. And then I would say also that for instance, when just a couple of days after the visit of the Pope to Estonia, I went to Narva, where there were the church days, kirikupäevad, and there was a conference of religious sociology, typical such conference, and the professor of the Tartu University spoke, and he said that after what we saw last Tuesday, when the Pope was in Tallinn, really we cannot say anymore that the Estonian people are an atheistic people. If he saw what we witnessed, especially among the young people who were in Kali Church, as a sign that even if people here, especially perhaps in Estonia, don't relate themselves very much to any institutional church, but there is like openness for something, they're waiting for something. And I would say that I think that perhaps Estonia are not very religious, but they are not atheists. They are believers in something, they are looking for something. And perhaps we saw it not only when the Pope was here, but also when he was here. But so I think that the religious values and the religious dimension of man and woman are very present in our society now, as much, I would say, as it was before, even if in a slightly different way.
Okay, I think we should more or less start wrapping it up now. And maybe finally, could each one of you bring out one thing that's really specific about Europe that should be kept and how you see it could be kept? Maybe we could start from Pablo now, because you have been the last all the time.
Okay, I would put it, I think, in one phrase. It's quite well-known phrase. It's called unity in diversity. I think this is what is Europe for me, because it was a lot talked today about tolerance and respect. I heard from some speakers another point of view, but I think it's anyway it's the basis. When you respect other people, you coexist with them, you do not hate them, and you do not kill or hurt them. For example, one of my mentor, he was member of the Rome Club, and he was also director of Geneva Institute of Management. Unfortunately, he already died. He was old man, but he already managed during his life to design so-called, we know, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but there is no Declaration of Human Obligations. And he wrote there, it should be something like this, because we really lack it. Because sometimes we too much taking care of ourselves. Sometimes we listen others, sometimes we listen some disinformation or lie, and we become very egoistic, and it destroys our societies and it clashes our societies. But he says that it should be towards everything, towards family, towards its own personality and health, because if you are not health, then your society should pay for your health, and it's, you know, on a budget, it's one more wage. And he also says a lot about nature, so respect towards, you know, clean nature and understanding basically what is climate change. Because when I look at Bangladesh or India, when in rivers it's full of trash, my heart is very much in pain in that situation. So it's unity in diversity, and really it's about Europe, which has its own identity, culture worldwide, which Ukraine is taking example of, and many other countries can be inspired of. But it's Europe which understands itself and which does not become something, you know, globalized one unit, but it is actually attractive in this diversity. And I very much respect words which were said today about traditions, church, family, Estonian identity. It's what we follow in Ukraine because we understand what is sovereignty under threat. But we also try to be respectful and tolerant to people in Ukraine which are thinking about things differently or speak Russian but not Ukrainian. And this, I think, is also making us closer to Europe. And I really hope that we have a common future, a peaceful future and a prosperous one.
I love the part about human obligations, especially. Actually, I think many liked it. Okay, Father Philip?
For me, above all, Europe should be a place where every human person is important. Also, those who doesn't seem to be important because they are weak or because they have no power. So for me, I would say that the European spirit should be related with that.
Your speech was so splendid that it's very little to add actually on that. I guess the only one sentence could be that you have to believe, we have to believe that that's what we are. And in that sentence, we can actually have all the content of our future. And then just make sure that the next generation is kept on board, because now parliaments tend to be a bit too conservative in the sense that it's only the elderly people from 55 up, myself as well amongst them, we vote. But in the research in Finland, people under 40, there was only 35% voting. And this means that the next generation, it's the democracy which is endangered, and this is what we should work on.
So, as a conclusion, I think, of that panel, human lives matter, even the young lives, and those lives that seem to be insignificant. And we also have obligations in addition to the rights. So, thank you.
Thank you.